Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It started like any other quiet Friday evening, the kind I usually looked forward to after a long work week. The house smelled of rosemary chicken and baked potatoes, and soft jazz played from the Bluetooth speaker on the kitchen counter. The light from the pendant lamp cast a warm amber hue across the dining table, making everything feel calm, predictable. My name is Linda. I'm 58. Life has been stable, comfortable, even. After 30 years of marriage, routine becomes a comfort you learn to appreciate more than you thought you would in your youth. My husband, Charles, had mentioned that his cousin David would be in town for business and asked if he could come over for dinner. I'd met David a few times over the years, family barbecues, the occasional wedding, but he was always more of a distant relative, one of those people you smile at across a crowded room and make small talk with before moving on. So when Charles told me he was working late and that David would arrive before him, I didn't think much of it. I just nodded and kept basting the chicken, humming along to the saxophone in the background. The doorbell rang promptly at 7. I wiped my hands on a towel, smoothed down my blouse, and opened the door. And there he was. David looked older than I remembered, of course. We all age. But he had one of those faces that carried time gracefully. His hair, once pitch black, was now a soft salt and pepper. There was a warmth in his smile that didn't feel rehearsed. It was the kind of smile that made you feel seen, like he wasn't just greeting you, but recognizing you. "Linda," he said, his voice low and familiar, "you haven't changed a bit." I laughed, brushing off the compliment the way women my age are trained to do. Come in, come in. Charles is running late, but dinner's almost ready." He stepped inside, the scent of his cologne mixing with the roasted garlic and thyme in the air. He brought a bottle of red wine, which he handed to me with a shy grin. "I wasn't sure what you liked." We settled into the kitchen, the conversation flowing more easily than I expected. We talked about nothing at first: traffic, weather, mutual relatives. But there was something gentle about the way he looked at me as I moved about the kitchen, something attentive. Not flirtatious exactly, just present. "You've made this house feel alive," he said at one point, his eyes scanning the photos on the mantel, the plants near the window, the throw pillows I'd rearranged just that afternoon. I smiled, pouring the wine. "It's taken years to get it this way. I like things to feel calm. Charles always says I arrange a room the way a conductor arranges a symphony." He took the glass, pausing before sipping. "He's lucky to have you." There was a silence that lingered just a moment too long before I turned to check on the chicken. Dinner passed with laughter and shared stories. David was funny, more than I remembered, and sharper, more insightful. He had this way of asking questions that didn't just scratch the surface. He wanted to know more, to dig just enough to make you remember parts of yourself you'd buried under years of work and marriage and motherhood. When Charles finally walked in, his tie loosened and briefcase in hand, the mood shifted slightly. Still warm, still familiar, but more filtered. David became more reserved, more careful. The three of us finished dinner with pleasant conversation, but I couldn't help noticing the way his eyes sometimes drifted toward me when he thought no one was looking. Later, after Charles excused himself to shower and go over paperwork, David and I remained at the table with the last of the wine. The kitchen light had been dimmed, casting soft shadows across his face. I was about to ask if he wanted dessert when he leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "There's something I've been meaning to say for a long time," he said, his fingers slowly turning the base of his wine glass. "I didn't know if I ever would." but tonight feels right. I tilted my head. All right, I'm listening. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of held breath. Do you remember that summer years ago? Charles and I stayed with you for a few weeks when our parents were overseas. You were, what, 28 then? I nodded slowly, heart picking up its pace. Yes, I remember. You were the first woman who ever made me believe love could be quiet and strong. I was just a kid then, I know. But you treated me like I mattered. You saw me when no one else did. I blinked, unsure of what to say. I never forgot that, he added gently. Even when I married, even through the mess of my divorce, even in the loneliest nights, I remembered you. The way you moved through a room, the way you laughed, the kindness in your eyes. I never said a word because it would have been wrong, and it still might be, but I needed you to know. The air grew still, like the room itself was holding its breath. My fingers tightened slightly around my glass. David. I'm not asking for anything, Linda, he said, his voice steady but soft. I just wanted you to know. That's all. My mind was a blur of memories, of quiet glances I'd brushed off, of things unsaid and years long past. There was no threat in his words, no expectation, just truth. And honesty, even when inconvenient, has a weight that lingers. I looked at him for a long time before nodding slowly. Thank you for telling me. He offered a quiet smile, one filled with something deeper than relief. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was hope. I couldn't quite tell. Charles called from upstairs, breaking the spell. I stood, clearing the dishes with trembling hands. And in that moment, something shifted, not between David and me, but within me. I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew this dinner had changed something I hadn't even realized was still waiting to be stirred. The dishes clinked softly as I placed them in the sink, each sound echoing louder than it should have in the stillness of the kitchen. My heart was still fluttering, an unfamiliar, almost adolescent kind of flutter. I could feel David's presence behind me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me aware. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that. Charles called again from upstairs, asking if I'd seen his phone charger. I gave a quick reply and turned back to David, who had moved to help with the plates. He didn't say anything else about his confession, and I didn't push. But his eyes held something unspoken, not heavy, not demanding, just there. After a few more moments of quiet cleanup, he gently touched my elbow and said, I should probably get going. I walked him to the door, the porch light casting a soft glow across his face. He didn't lean in, didn't reach for me, didn't make it more than what it was. He simply looked at me, that same gentle expression still on his face, and said, Thank you for the meal, and for hearing me out. I nodded. Drive safe. He hesitated a second, then turned and walked into the night. The door clicked shut, and I leaned against it, taking a slow, deliberate breath. My chest felt tight, not with guilt, but with the strange heaviness of being seen. Not as a wife or a hostess or someone's mother. Just me. Linda. Later that night, as Charles snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning. I wasn't angry. I wasn't confused. I just remembered. I remembered that summer David had talked about, how he'd always lingered nearby when I was cooking, how he'd asked questions no one else had. I'd thought it was teenage curiosity. Maybe it was. But now, looking back, I saw it differently. The next morning came like any other. Charles left early for work, barely finishing his toast. I busied myself with laundry and errands, but David's words stayed with me, curling around the edges of my thoughts like smoke. By afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old photo albums. Not digital ones, the real ones with worn corners and faded ink. There he was, in the background of a 4th of July picture, holding a sparkler and glancing my way when he thought no one noticed. My fingers lingered on the photo longer than they should have. 2 days passed. Then, on Monday evening, I got a message. "Thank you again for Friday. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. I meant every word, but I also respect your life and your marriage. I just couldn't carry it anymore. Be well." I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. 1,000 responses formed and dissolved in my head. I could have ignored it. I could have written something distant and polite, but I didn't. Instead, I wrote, "You didn't make me uncomfortable. You made me remember something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Thank you for that." I hit send and instantly regretted it. Not because I meant it any less, but because acknowledging it made it real. The next few weeks passed in a strange in-between state. David didn't message again, and I didn't reach out. But the world around me felt different, like I was seeing it with a layer peeled back. Colors seemed deeper. Music, somehow more poignant. It was as if he'd shaken something loose inside me, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. One afternoon, Charles and I were walking through the neighborhood, hand in hand. He was talking about a project at work, something about budgets and deadlines, and I tried to focus. But I kept wondering, when had I stopped listening? When had we started talking past each other instead of to each other? That night, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. The moon hung low and full in the sky, casting a pale light across the yard, and in that quiet, still moment, I whispered something I hadn't dared say aloud. I miss being really seen. The confession surprised even me. I loved Charles. I did. He had been my partner through everything. Mortgages, miscarriages, milestones. But somewhere along the way, I'd disappeared into the life we'd built together. And now, after one unexpected dinner, I was starting to feel the edges of myself again. A week later, David reached out. "I'll be back in town next Friday, just overnight. I'll keep my distance if you prefer, but I'd really like to see you again, even if just for coffee." I read the message over and over, my hands trembling slightly. I didn't reply right away. I needed to understand what I was feeling. Not for David, but for myself. It wasn't about cheating or betrayal. It wasn't about romance in the way people assumed. It was about remembering the woman I used to be, the woman who had dreams and longings and a voice of her own before everything became about everyone else. On Friday morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my scarf. My reflection looked familiar, but different. There was a softness in my face, a curiosity I hadn't seen in years. I took a deep breath and typed, "Let's meet. Just coffee. Just to talk." His response came almost instantly. "I'll be there. Thank you." I closed the message, heart racing. I didn't know where this would lead. But I knew I had to go, not for David, not even for Charles, but for the part of myself I'd forgotten. And as I stepped outside into the morning light, I felt something stir deep inside me. Something alive. The coffee shop was small and tucked away on a quiet side street, the kind of place people visit more for the atmosphere than the caffeine. The kind with handwritten menus and warm brick walls. I chose a seat by the window, sunlight stretching across the table like an invitation to be honest. I arrived 10 minutes early. I don't know why, nerves maybe, or the strange mix of guilt and excitement that had been fluttering inside me all morning. I wore a soft cream sweater and a pair of simple pearl earrings. Not dressed up, but not careless either. I wasn't here to impress, I told myself. Still, I cared how I looked. That realization struck me more deeply than I expected. David walked in just as the clock struck 10, a smile already forming when his eyes met mine. He looked tired, but in a thoughtful way, like someone carrying too many things in his heart and trying not to drop any of them. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't take my hands or speak in whispers. He just sat across from me, ordered a black coffee, and said, "I didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would," I replied honestly. "But here I am." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the quiet murmur of other conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. And then slowly, gently, the conversation began to flow. It wasn't about that night. Not at first. We talked about our childhoods, about the old family reunions that had blurred into each other, about my garden and his travels, about books, about aging. It was easy, comforting, and something else, something stirring. I didn't say what I said to ruin anything, David said at one point, looking down at his hands. I said it because I've carried it for too long, and I needed you to know that even if the world sees you as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's neighbor, I saw you. I still see you. I looked at him, heart thudding, mouth suddenly dry. That's the part that scared me, that I liked hearing it, that it made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. He met my eyes. It's not wrong to want to feel alive. We didn't talk about love or desire or what ifs. Not directly. We just sat there, two people on opposite sides of the same unspoken truth. I could have told him to leave me alone. I could have said that it was a lovely memory, but not something I wanted to revisit. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Do you think we get just one great love in life?" David smiled softly. "No, I think we get many chances to connect, but only if we're brave enough to see them for what they are." That sentence stayed with me long after we parted. We didn't linger. No dramatic goodbye, no promises. Just a warm look and a simple, "Take care." But something shifted in me that day. A quiet, powerful shift. When I came home, Charles was in the living room watching golf, the same way he did every Saturday afternoon. He glanced up and asked if I'd picked up milk. I told him I had and handed him the bag. He kissed my cheek without looking, already turning back to the TV. And I stood there for a moment, holding the empty bag, feeling the weight of what was missing. Not because of David, but because I had allowed myself to fade, quietly, over time. Later that night, after Charles had gone to bed, I sat outside on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The stars above were scattered and still. I thought about the life I had, the life I built. And I thought about the version of myself I'd buried underneath being responsible, being reliable, being quiet. That night, I pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I used to write stories, small things, nothing published. But they had been mine. And as I let the pen move across the page, I felt something spark again. Not because of David, but because I had remembered myself. The days that followed were gentle but strange. I was more aware of the way Charles and I moved around each other like practiced dancers, never stepping on each other's toes, but rarely meeting each other's eyes. I didn't blame him. I didn't feel angry. I just saw it clearly now. One evening, I asked him if he remembered our first trip to the lake, the year before we got married. He chuckled and said, "Of course. You got sunburned on your nose." I smiled. We used to talk all night back then." He nodded, eyes still on his phone. "Yeah, life was simpler then." That was it. That's all he said. And it wasn't cruel or dismissive. It was just disconnected. Like a man looking at a photograph of a moment he no longer lived in. A week later, David sent another message. "No pressure, but I'd love to see you again, just for a walk. You've been on my mind." This time, I didn't answer right away, not because I was unsure of him, but because I was starting to ask myself different questions. What do I want? What makes me feel whole? What am I afraid to admit? And as I looked in the mirror that night, really looked, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of change. I was afraid of never changing at all.